One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Is podcast editing totally overwhelming you? Like you are just ready to pull your hair out, trying to figure out all the things, all the buttons, all the like, do I need to do this? And how do I mix this? And what are these? I don't even understand because it's too overwhelming mixing tracks and figuring out interviews. Like I could go on and on about all the things that I see people complain about when it comes to podcast editing. Well, look no further, my friends. I am having a special workshop training in the month of February dedicated to podcast editing. Go to crystalprofit.com/workshop to learn more. Again, that's crystalprofit.com/workshop. How long should the introduction for my podcast episodes be? That is the question from the community that I'm answering today. I'm sharing with you all of my tips, my experience, and what I think is how you should format your podcast introduction. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut/time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? Hey y'all, Crystal here. So today I want to answer another question from the community, and it is, how long should the introduction to my podcast episodes be? Now, I have done several podcast episodes about podcast format and show length and just things about setting up your entire podcast episode. But today I want to specifically address just the introduction, because I think that this is your opportunity to really grab someone's attention and to get them to stay for the entire show. But you have to set this up properly. And there are 3 main components that I want to share with you that have to do with your podcast introduction. But before we get there, I want to actually talk about what is your podcast introduction. What are we actually talking about? I'm talking about the first 15 to 30 seconds or even a minute of your podcast episode. So it's not like the long drawn out of what you would have discussing someone's bio, if it's an interview or anything I'm talking about that short, your first impression, okay? The first impression that you have to this person that is listening to your podcast. Right? They put their earbuds in, they're ready to go, they're going on a walk, or they're driving in their car, whatever it is that they're doing while they're listening to your podcast. How are you going to grab their attention? Because I can't even tell you how many times I've turned on a podcast and, I listen to the first 15 or 20 seconds and then I'm just like, oh, that's not what I thought it was about. I'm next, thank you, next, going on to the next podcast. That is what you want to avoid. You want to make sure that you are giving listeners something right off the bat that will help them tune in to the rest of the show, right? Because that is our goal, to get them to listen to the entire thing, not just the first few seconds. So here are 3 things that I want to talk about specifically for your podcast introduction. So the 3 things that you need are a hook, your podcast main theme, and then the actual introduction of the topic that you're talking about. Now, I kind of said in the beginning, it needs to be, 15 seconds to a minute long. But honestly, it needs to be as long as it needs to be, but as short as possible to really get your message across. So I don't think that your introduction needs to be 5 minutes long. I think that that's way too long. People, we all live really busy lives anyway, and people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So you want to make sure that you get in there, get straight to the point, and make sure that you have something compelling for your audience to listen to. So what does this look like? The 3 components are your hook, your podcast main theme, and your introduction. What are each of those? Let's break them down. So first of all, a hook is something compelling, something that is either interesting, a fun fact. I've heard where people will take snippets of the actual interview that they've done and put it at the very beginning. I like that personally. Some people don't, but I think it's kind of cool to put a really high point right in the very few seconds, because you're like, oh, what? I want to hear more about that. When did that happen? What's going to lead up to that? I like that as a listener. Some people don't like to do those, and that's fine. But you need to make it very apparent from the beginning. You need to have something to hook your audience in and get them to listen to the rest of the podcast episode. So that is number 1. You have to have some sort of hook to get your podcast listeners very interested in what the rest of your episode is about. So the podcast main theme, the second thing I want to talk about is, what is your podcast about? So I teach my students and clients to come up with an elevator pitch. This is if someone asks you at a dinner party, oh, what do you do, Crystal? I'm like, oh, well, I have a podcast. What is your podcast about? This is when you would insert your elevator pitch. And that is what I think you should have after your hook. You have your hook, and then you have your podcast main theme, and then you go into it's almost like you start the beginning of the episode after that. Now, this isn't really about what to put in your podcast main theme, but I'll give you a quick overview of what I have in mine and what I suggest you have in yours. Keep it short. I think something between 15 seconds to 30 seconds for your podcast main theme is perfect, because if you have listeners that have been around for a while, they're going to hear it over and over and over and over and over again, right? Because you want them to keep coming back. So a lot of the episodes or a lot of podcasts that I listen to, I know that they're about 15 to 30 seconds because I'll be honest, I fast forward through them. I hit that little button when I'm listening on my phone. I'll hit skip forward 30 seconds. Then I'll be like, oh, wait, I forgot that show is only 15 seconds. So I hit the 15-second back and then like, it's a whole thing. And I know people do it to my show too. And that's totally fine because those are my like dedicated raving fan listeners. That's cool. They can do that. They can do whatever they want. But for someone brand new to my podcast, they stumbled upon me or they listen to me on another podcast and they're checking me out for the first time. I want them to know immediately what my podcast is about. So in my podcast main theme, I say who I talk to. I speak to entrepreneurs. That's probably you too. I talk about how to start, launch, and market podcast. That is what I say in my podcast main theme. So I suggest you have something like that that helps listeners identify immediately, oh, this podcast is for me, and this is the value that I'm going to get out of it. And I think that that's so important to establish in the beginning of your show. That way someone's not listening for 5 minutes and then they're almost mad. They're mad. They're like, this person wasted my time. They hooked me in and I wasn't really that interested. Like, I say that. I know that's kind of dramatic, but I say that because I've done that before where I listen to something and I'm like, this is totally not what I thought it was. They like hooked me in with this like catchy headline or a graphic somewhere or like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, but I didn't find out until I actually listened to it. So I like for my listeners to self-identify immediately if my podcast is going to be for them or not, because I don't really speak to a lot of hobbyist podcasters. I speak to entrepreneurs that are using their podcast as either a marketing stream for them or a way for them to build a platform to bring in listeners and customers and potential clients. So those are the type of people that I speak to most of the time with my podcast. So it helps people, they can self-identify immediately like, oh, this is for me. I'm going to find value in this. Or, oh, like I'm looking for another true crime podcast. People stumble upon mine and they're like, oh no, this is a train wreck, but this is not true crime. Oh my gosh, we're getting on a totally different subject here. But okay, the third thing I want to talk about is how you kind of just ease into the introduction of your podcast. And this is what I say is the beginning of your intro. How meta is that, right? The beginning of your intro. But remember, you have your hook, because you got to get people to listen from the very, very beginning. Then you have your podcast main theme, and then I want you to have the introduction of your show. Now, you can start this any way that you want, but how I prefer is I have my hook, I have my main theme, and then I'll go into, oh, like I said in the beginning, or like I said in the introduction, calling my hook the introduction. Then I just immediately start talking. I get right into it. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I want to jump right into what I'm teaching, what I'm telling them, the story, like whatever it is. I want to get immediately into that because I want people to get as much value as they can from what they're listening to, what they're watching. I just want to get to the point because that's what I like to see. I like it when people get to the point, they don't beat around the bush, and they just don't waste my time because it is so frustrating when somebody wastes your time. Oh my gosh. And it makes me not want to come back to them. So I hope that you found this helpful. I mean, all of this, honestly, it's totally subjective. I can tell you it needs to be exactly 42 seconds, 42.3 seconds long, and it needs to have this many words and so many key phrases. Like I could give you an exact formula, right? But that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for some general guidelines in how you can help make your podcast better. So I hope that you found this helpful because I know that it's something I'm very passionate about. But that does it for today. So I hope that you found some of this helpful. I think that I want to do some more episodes that really dive deeper into exactly how the format should be for each little piece of the podcast, because I think that every piece of it is worth talking about. I know we shouldn't all be cookie cutter and try to make all of our podcasts sound the same, but there are reasons why I do a lot of the things that I do with my podcast. And if you find that helpful for me to share things like this, tell me about it. Let me know if you found this episode helpful. Tell me if you're like, Crystal, don't ever talk about that again because I could care less. Let me know because I'm creating this for you. I'm not creating this for me to hear myself. I'm creating this to help you with your podcast. So I need your feedback. I need to know what other topics you want me to cover. So if you have not subscribed, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave us a rating and a review. You can tell me in the review box what you want to hear about, or tell me your biggest takeaway from this episode or any other episodes. I would so appreciate it because each time we get a rating and a review, it helps push this podcast out into front of more people and hopefully impact more entrepreneurs that are trying to start, launch, and market their podcast. But that's all I have for you today. So you can check out the show notes at crystalprofit.com/episode 127. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.